Welcome to Support Life, a program focusing on current social issues from a life-affirming perspective. I'm Gavin Baulch and my guest is Gerard Flood, an educator of suburban realities. Welcome, Gerard.
It's a very great pleasure to be here, Gavin.
Good. Now, talking about suburbs, you're from the eastern suburbs, whereabouts?
I'd say the southern suburbs,
right.
Mentone.
Mentone, lovely.
I'll be between Frankston and Moorabbin.
Okay. And what was life like growing up there?
Oh, gee, for me it was a paradise of billy cart rides,
Oh, yes.
Guy Fawkes nights, which my mum frowned upon because she said, like a good Irish girl, that Guy Fawkes was a good man. But cricket and sport in the street with my brothers and neighbours. I went to play cricket at Parkdale in the under-16s as an 11-year-old and played till I was in my 30s at various suburban clubs. Played baseball for 15 glorious years at St Kilda Baseball Club. A truly charmed suburban life.
Perfect. Now, in sport, and particularly cricket, we learned some principles that do last for life. What were they?
Well, the volunteers of the dads, etc., who looked after the boys was a truly moving thing for me. The wonderful men around the club who loved the game. On the cricket field, though, it was told that fairness, you play the game for fairness. I, as a successful cricketer and a captain, I had the spontaneity to recall batsmen who were given out wrongly, to tell the boys, my boys, that we should signal when only we know the truth of whether something's out or not out, or a boundary. And I had the great joy of the fruits of sportsmanship from a young age. And to me, the saying that something's not cricket is more than a comment about sport. It's it became ingrained in me that something's right or it's wrong.
Yes.
And that is something we should make our judgments by.
Okay, so it's something to aspire to, but it needs leaders, doesn't it? Now, who at school was a kind of a mentor by his behaviour?
Well, school was more guerrilla warfare when boys were unsupervised, and we had to sort out our own fights. And one thing we learnt was that don't pick on people smaller than yourself. Only a coward does that. Don't hit when someone's down. Don't kick. And whether these rules were always followed or not was not the point, but people knew what was expected of them, and there was peer group recognition of what's acceptable and what's not. But when it came to adult leadership, that more occurred later in my schooling. But primary school was traumatic, challenging, and formative.
Okay, so bullying back then, it may not have been called that, but it did take place, right?
It certainly did. I saw some terrifying examples of violence, and there was a informal undercurrent of bullying is profoundly wrong, and something should be done about it when it happens. But that was a strong undercurrent in the peer group, which was partly sort of insulated from the pleadings of our teachers, the lovely nuns. Those experiences form you and never leave you.
They do. Now, at secondary college, who inspired you most?
Well, I could say my fellow students who were better sportsmen than I was, but the quiet sacrifice of the religious teachers who had given themselves to the education of very unwilling and unpromising students like myself. The Salesians' mission is to the less privileged in the community, and as a working class cohort, our expectations of social progress were not always to the fore. So the teachers did their best to try to lead us to become persons of what they called those days good character. It was always impressed on us that the school's job is to try to lead us towards forming our character on the basis of right judgment and conscientious examination of what we can discern to be true.
Mm-hmm. Where does the word trust come into this?
Well, trust, the essence of Salesian education as taught by Don Bosco was that you cannot educate a person properly unless the person has a trust in the mentor or the teacher personally. And you're not going to have trust unless you share with the boy in the classroom, on the sports field, in his cultural activities, and in his religious observance and his spiritual life. Unless you share his journey and his development in those areas, he's not going to trust you. And without trust, you're not going to have genuine education. You may have a facsimile of academic education, you may progress, you may become a great sportsman. But unless you have trust, the educator is going to be impeded by the full flowering of the student's growth.
Well, Gerard, I trust you'll be in that seat when we come back after the break. You're watching Support Life, and we will be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is Gerard Flood, an educator of suburban realities. Gerard, we certainly were talking about life in the suburbs, but from an educator, you've learnt things and now you're observing what's happening in society. But before us, there are many folks like, let's take Anne Frank. How was her life influential?
Anne Frank's diary gives us a picture of the oppression and terror inflicted on a young girl completely innocent of the machinations of world politics and politics carried on by other means is in military and police oppression. Her story should make us reflect on the causes of us humans inflicting misery on their fellow man for illicit purposes, and it also shows the nobility of courage and forbearance in extreme circumstances. So she reveals a world of heroism that in my life is mercifully unnecessary. I've had a charmed life, and millions and millions of people around the world are suffering innocently terrifying oppression, and it makes me want to reach out to alleviate that if possible. I'm reminded, I think, of a Chesterton saying that when a Frenchman sees a rich man, he wants to be like him, but when an Irishman sees a rich man, he thinks, why can't more people enjoy the fruits of comfort also, and to stick up for the underprivileged.
So we need people who have gone before us, let's call them the saints in life, to stir us up to higher and better things. But at the same time, we have to reveal where things are going wrong. What are some things that have come to your attention that our watching audience might need to do some personal research on?
Oh, well, a modern secular saint would be Jennifer Zeng, who suffered the most horrific torture as a young mum under the Chinese Communist Party. She was a very lucky lady in that she was very highly intelligent and educated. She, like millions and millions of members of the Chinese Communist Party, became a devotee of the life-affirming and extremely healthfully beneficial Falun Gong meditation exercises. But when the Communist Party turned against Falun Gong, she was imprisoned and tortured mercilessly. She survived, she escaped, and she wrote to tell us of what's going on there. A person of enormous courage and resilience, and a wonderful example. Unfortunately, the mainstream media don't want to make enough of her example for various reasons. Yeah. But she truly is, to a new generation, should be a beacon of courage.
Yes, yes. So what other realities now can we touch on?
The realities of our negligence is that Australians are closing their mind to the crimes, the vast crimes against humanity of the human organ stealing racket run in China which is torture and murder of innocent living people who are vivisected for profit. Since 2006 the world has known this under the Bloody Harvest report. But the average Australian citizen is being shielded from it due to the complicity of government, big business and the media. It's something that our children will have the guilt of their parents and forebears unless something is done to bring this to notice. It's truly the most egregious cruelty of akin to the smaller scale killing of unborn children in Victoria by agency of a terrible law.
Yeah. Well, there'd be a lass who we could speak about. Her name is Rita Joseph. What does she stand for?
Oh, I think Rita Joseph is a Canberra lady who has written a most magisterial work to educate us that the international human rights establishment of agreements, covenants, profoundly supports the civil rights of the unborn and reveals the lies and untruths that the supporters of abortion have to go through to try to justify something that is profoundly offensive to international human rights law. It's so depressingly true that the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities has to specifically rule out rights of the unborn as a ground for action under the Australian Human Rights Law. It truly illustrates the moral corruption of the pro-abortion argument.
Yes.
And Rita Joseph is really an international hero of judicial right judgment in her great book, Human Rights and the Unborn Child.
Thank you, Gerard, for that information. You're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch and my guest is Gerard Flood, an educator of urban realities. Gerard, we're touching on realities, and we're going to look at a word here that we ought not use for our own gain, like the government ought to do something, but from a philosophical perspective. Let's unpackage my response to ought.
I was brought up in a time when we were told that our behaviour should be directed by what we think is correct, right, and based on truth, not based on instinct or how we feel, without examining our conscience as to whether it's fair and will have will do some good. Now, I was taught, rightly or wrongly, that freedom is the freedom to do what I ought to do in the context of what's right and true. I'm not free morally to do what I feel like doing, regardless of the consequences or regardless of discerning whether it's based on a fair judgment that it's right or true. So ought is a process for me for the will and the intellect, not a process for the emotions and poorly rated belief.
Yes.
Without examination.
Yes. All right. Well, now let's examine perhaps the farming community. What's at stake here, and what's going wrong?
The farming industry is more than an industry, but the world of business is cannibalising agricultural production with extremely unfortunate results in very many different ways for the blind pursuit of profit. Profit for those who are in a position to take advantage of monetary gain. The Australian government's contemptible agricultural industrial policies have been revealed as a fraud since 2000.
So this is both sides of politics?
Oh, by government I mean Sir Humphrey's government, Treasury and Finance, and their underlings in trade have a stranglehold on the de facto decisions of government, and the Customs House Agreement of Brisbane 2000 lays bare the fraud of the governments of since at least 2000 of morally corrupt accounting procedures that have the most profoundly destructive effects on Australian industry, on Australian families, on communities, on factory workers. It engenders a creeping corruption of the public servants who do government's bidding and the bidding of unseen forces.
So here we are, we produce food, we believe that we are good exporters. If you'd said 30 years ago that Australia would be a net importer of food by value by the mid-2010s, in this decade, you would have been met with a litany of disbelief. But that is the area we're entering, and there will be no turning back, because there's no end in sight to the false assumptions of our current policies. So instead of feeding the world, we now import food, which drives up our overseas foreign debt. It increases the interest rate we have to pay on that foreign debt, and it feeds only one thing: the profits of the major corporations, with the complicity of the so-called quality daily national newspapers. Yes, there seems to be a partnership, doesn't there? They're in bed together somewhere.
Well, the media is the willing accomplice of stories fed to it over a long period, and they will not allow contrary stories to appear without without attacking it.
All right, so our watching audience tonight, probably young and access to knowledge and of course the internet, what would you say to them?
I would say that as long as they fail to understand that the world is controlled by hard fact and not superficial appearances, they will be blinded by the appearance of things around them. The Federal Treasurer recently ruled out that one of the Western world's most corrupt agricultural companies would not be allowed to take control of Australia's major agricultural export. The mere fact that the government was considering this as viable is a huge indictment of the moral corruption of the national interest being a very low consideration. It was instructive that this decision of government to deny this corrupt company access to Australia was only achieved by a small non-government organisation which doesn't even have a financial interest in the outcome. But volunteer organisations have a huge opportunity to achieve incredibly valuable defences of Australia's national interest.
Yes. Well, there's a good note to finish on. Grassroots movement and volunteers without a financial investment.
As was said in one of the Harrison Ford movies, when revolutionaries were attacking the government, they said these revolutionaries will win this because you can't win a war without volunteers. Well, my volunteering is a guerrilla war on the side of the defence of Australia's national interests and the defence of its people into the far future.
Thank you, Gerard. Well, you've been watching Support Life, and that's all for our program today. Join us again next week. Goodbye.